At this moment, Amy Chua, a tenured professor at Yale Law School, stepped forward. She is known as the famous Tiger Mom. Not only does she advocate for the authoritarian parenting style of the East, but she also practices it by setting 10 prohibitions for her 2 daughters. For example, no overnight stays or gatherings with friends outside the home, no watching TV or playing computer games, and so on. These 10 prohibitions are very Eastern and very authoritarian, aren't they? Where's the slightest hint of democracy? But it was under this authoritarian parenting style that her daughter was admitted to both Harvard and Yale universities at the age of 17. Amy Chua even published a parenting book specifically about this, called Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother. This caused a sensation in the United States, where the democratic parenting style dominates, and even made the cover of Time magazine. Why does authoritarian parenting work? So you may wonder, why does authoritarian parenting work? In fact, it is because it somewhat conforms to the developmental characteristics of children's brains. Childhood and adolescence are critical periods for the development of brain structure and function. On the one hand, their brains are highly plastic, so they have strong learning abilities. On the other hand, because their brains are still developing, their higher functions such as self-control and concentration are still somewhat deficient. Therefore, without external constraints, they may have behavioral and psychological problems due to weak self-control and concentration. Looking back at Amy Chua's 10 prohibitions, they are actually external constraints and supervision specifically aimed at her children's weaknesses in self-control, concentration, and so on. Therefore, the authoritarian parenting style that originates from the East is not only effective, but also necessary. Misconceptions about authoritarian parenting. However, authoritarian parenting does not mean that the stricter parents are with their children, the better. Parenting must also be based on the brain and psychological development of children and adolescents. Here, I want to introduce an important concept called critical period. The development of children's brains and psychology is not uniform, but rather has critical periods. This critical period refers to the period when they are most sensitive to developing specific abilities or behaviors, so it is also called the optimal period, sensitive period, and so on. For example, 2 to 3 years old is the critical period for children's oral language development, and 4 to 5 years old is the critical period for children's written language learning. Critical periods have 2 characteristics. During the critical period, learning the most sensitive abilities or behaviors is the fastest and most effective, achieving twice the result with half the effort. The critical period is short, and once it is missed, it is difficult to make up for it. For example, research on the wolf children in India who were raised by wolves from a young age shows that if children do not learn language before the age of 12, no matter how hard they try to teach them language later, they will never be able to use language like normal people. Of course, in our society that values education, missing critical periods is rare. However, the bigger problem now is that under the guidance of marketing slogans like "Don't let your child fall behind at the starting line," parents have extreme anxiety and force their children to attend interest classes and extracurricular classes before they have entered the critical period for the corresponding abilities. Wasting money is one thing, but more importantly, it causes great or even permanent harm to children's abilities and psychological development. Professor Gessel, a child psychologist in the United States, selected a pair of identical twins with the same genes to study climbing stairs. When the older brother had just learned to stand and walk at 48 weeks old, he began training to climb stairs. After 6 weeks of training for 15 minutes a day, he learned to climb stairs at 54 weeks old. The younger brother, on the other hand, began learning to climb stairs at 52 weeks old, after he had learned to stand and walk. He only underwent 2 weeks of training for 15 minutes a day, and also learned to climb stairs at 54 weeks old. In other words, although the older brother started 4 weeks earlier, the younger brother caught up later, and both reached the goal at the same time. Why? The reason is very simple, because when the younger brother was practicing climbing stairs, he had already mastered the movements of standing and walking better. Therefore, when he was learning to climb stairs, his physical development was more mature, so he learned faster and better. More importantly, the younger brother did not experience frequent falls and crying during training like the older brother did. On the contrary, the younger brother expressed a stronger desire to learn to climb stairs, and this learning desire was also transferred to the learning of other sports skills. Professor Gessel's experiment shows that in order for authoritarian parenting to be effective, parents must understand the rules of their children's growth and give them enough space and time, rather than forcing them to grow too fast, which will be more conducive to their growth.